All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining our session this evening. We are so excited to have Ann Dolin provide this presentation today. So Ann Dolin has a really strong conviction that school does not have to place stress on children and parents. Based on her nearly 30 years of experience working with students, she has developed practical strategies that she shares to help kids succeed and make the most of their academic journey, including college admissions. Ann is a former public school teacher and author who founded Educational Connections in 1998. Her team provides tutoring, executive function coaching, test preparation, and college admissions counseling in the Washington, D.C. area and beyond. They specialize in helping students to craft a narrative and a strong high school resume, enabling them to stand out in very competitive college admissions environments. So with that, I am so pleased and honored to introduce Ann to you all. Ann, take it away.
Thank you so much, Sanjita. Thank you for the introduction, and I'm so happy to be here tonight. So this evening, we're talking about the SAT and the ACT. Take it or skip it altogether. And what is the role of testing these days when it comes to college entrance? Well, first, before we get into the nitty-gritty, I'm wondering, what grade is your child in? If you can take a second and go into the chat and just type in your child's grade. When will they graduate from high school? You can either put in their graduation year or probably easier, just put in their grade. That would be so helpful. Thank you. So let's see what we have. Let me take a look at the chat. All right. So let's see. We have 11th, 12th, 10th, 11th, 9th, 10th, 11th grade twins, 11th, 11th, 9th, 11th, 11th. 11th. Okay, so lots of juniors, a 10th grader, a senior. Awesome. That's fabulous. All right. Typically, I also get parents of younger students, 9th grade and even middle schoolers, because they're just curious about what goes on with college admissions. So regardless of the age of your child, welcome. I hope that you get a lot out of this tonight. As Sanjita mentioned, my name is Ann Dolin, and for the last 24 years, my tutors, executive function coaches, and I have been helping kids to do better in school. And we also have a college consulting division of the company. And in no time have I seen such a greater change in college admissions than in the last couple of years. So what has changed when it comes to admissions? Well, one of the biggest changes we're seeing because of COVID is a test optional environment. We're going to talk a lot about that tonight. So much has changed, so much changed before COVID. We were going in this environment where colleges were saying, you can submit a test, but you don't have to. But COVID just accelerated that whole trend. So the question that we're going to answer tonight is, where is that role now? And should my child even take a test in the first place? So let's start out by talking about what's going on in the world of college admissions. We know data from the Common App shows that applications by highly selective colleges, which UVA, for example, is one of them, those applications are up about 25% in 2 years. And that's significant. And we're not just seeing it in flagship schools like UVA, if you're in Virginia, Virginia Tech, William and Mary, but other schools, maybe a tier below, are also seeing more applications. The schools that are less competitive, however, have a different story to tell. They're not seeing it. So why is it that colleges are seeing more applications? Let's take a look at Virginia Tech, for example. In the fall of 2022, they received 45,000 applications. And look at the fall right before that. It's still super strong, but they only have about 67 slots left available. That doesn't mean they only select that many kids, but it does mean that they are seeing way more demand than they have room for. We're seeing the same thing at UVA, where about 50,000 kids apply, and they accept even fewer students than Virginia Tech. So for sure, the atmosphere has changed a lot. And part of it is because before COVID, when kids were expected to submit a test score, students only applied to schools that they generally thought, they had a decent shot at getting in. So even if they had good grades, but they didn't have great test scores, they might not apply to too many of those reach schools. But now kids with good grades, and we know because of grade inflation, a lot of kids have good grades. An A is the most reported score for students across the country. So we know that because a lot of kids have good grades, but they may not have had the test scores, they're still applying to those top tier schools. So that's why competitive schools are seeing more applications than ever. Kids are throwing their hat in the into the ring when they may not have otherwise. So let's take a look at what a good score is in the first place. It really depends where you want to go. For example, let's say that you want to go to William and Mary. The mid 50th percentile range, meaning that when they looked at kids that were accepted as freshmen, the freshman incoming class, they had a range on the SAT reading. And by the way, the top score on the SAT reading is 800. So the score range was between 660 and 740. Why is it so vast? Well, typically kids that maybe were recruited athletes or they were there for another reason, maybe on the lower end, but other students may round it out on the higher end. Let's take a look at math between 660 and 770. So these are really solid scores. For the ACT, the top score is a 36. However, William and Mary is saying we want pretty close to that. We want between a 30 and a 34. For UVA, it's even a little bit higher. One of our college consultants on our team worked at UVA for 11 years, and she said she was seeing kids at the higher end of the 30s. So usually 32, 33, and above that. Those were the kids that were strong applicants. So here's the thing. If you have a solid score, you want to submit it if you're within that range, especially if you're the top part of that range. A good score can help your application. Even if you have really great grades, a score can be another data point for schools. So you would want to submit that score. It can help you. But if you don't have a solid score, you may not want to submit your score. In fact, I would encourage you not to. We work with all the kids all the time where we're helping them make decisions about scores. And what often happens is they may not submit their scores to one of their top schools, but they will absolutely submit it to a target and a safety school, because to those schools, it's an amazing score. It's a really good score, but it may not be such a good score to this top school. So it's very strategic now. In fact, the College Board is seeing that kids are really strategic now about how they submit scores. It used to be that you submitted your scores to all the schools, but now kids are holding back and they're really waiting to see, all right, let me think more about this. For what schools will this be a good score? Oh, and one more thing. Here's another change. You own your own data. So if you have a great score and not such a good score in two different sittings, you don't have to submit all your test scores. You can only submit the ones you want. Furthermore, many schools super score. And that means if you took the SAT twice, for example, and you did well in reading on one sitting and well on math in the other, you can combine those scores and now get a super score. And this is your best score. Most schools will super score the SAT and the ACT now. So we know that a score can help you. However, if you don't submit a score, most schools won't hold it against you. Let's talk a little bit about those pros and those cons. Pros, it gives schools, submitting a test score, gives schools another data point. Just like a GPA is a data point, so is a test score. Some schools also require it. Depends where you want to apply, and this is rapidly changing. We're seeing that some schools that said we want to be test optional now Now they're saying, actually, we want to score. That is not true of the state schools in Virginia, but it is true of other school areas. For example, in Florida, all the Florida schools, University of Florida, Florida State, University of Georgia, all the Georgia schools now require a score. So another benefit of taking it is some of the schools on your list may want to score. And always check the requirements. Make sure that your student understands which schools want scores and which schools are really test optional. So here's the cons. It is one less data point, and it's greater scrutiny on other parts of your application if you don't submit a score. So this might be good or bad depending on your application. But for kids that are not submitting a score, that reader is going to look a little bit more at your essays. What differentiates you? What is unique about you? They're going to look at your grades. What classes did you take? We'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And not just your grades, but did you take a rigorous schedule? What are your extracurriculars like? How are your recommendations? Do they really help to paint a picture of you and help you submit and help you stand out? So I want to emphasize how individualized this decision is really based on the score in the colleges. It depends on the school's profile and your personal testing and academic profile. So if you're confused, you know what, when you get your child's scores back, especially as they're going into their senior year, you really do want to be strategic, and we're happy to help you with that. I'll put my information up a little bit later, and I'm happy to have a conversation with you, or our test prep coordinator, Jennifer or Erin, she runs our college consulting program, can also help you to make decisions. All right, so here's what I would recommend. Let's say that your student is going to be a competitive student. If they're applying to UVA, for example, that is a highly competitive school and they are a competitive student. So what should you do right now? What I would recommend, if you want to move towards taking a test, which I do recommend, to start with a practice test. A practice test is really helpful. These are tests that many people in the community offer. We offer them on Saturdays. Kids can roll out of bed and take a test. These are retired tests, so they're very similar to what kids get now. And they're scored the same day, and kids get a beautiful report back, color-coded, shows them how they did, their score, and where they did well, where they need help, and not just within each section, but breaking it down by types of question, what they need to work on. So a practice test provides a baseline score. It helps kids to understand where they're starting. But it also gives new test takers. These are kids that haven't taken a real test yet. It gives them practice with content, what they're going to see on the actual test, the pacing, how much time they have for each question, and helps build their stamina. Because still right now, tests are 3 hours long. So we recommend that kids coming in, thinking about college as sophomores, that they take a practice test late in their sophomore year, the summer after their sophomore year, or early in their junior year. So right now, if you have a junior and they haven't sat for a test, it might be helpful to sit for a practice test, or they can actually take a real test right now. We'll talk in a second about the timeline for testing. All right, so I mentioned these practice tests. These are dates that we have coming up. And again, it's $20 to take a test, but they're proctored by a live person, and kids get their test scores back right away. So these are our upcoming dates. We have one this Saturday, but it's a little tight to get in. But if you go to our website or scan this QR code, you'll see all the upcoming dates that we have. All right, here's the other reason tests are helpful in the beginning. It is ideal for students to take a practice ACT and a practice ACT. Did I say that right? ACT and SAT. And the reason that's helpful is because we can take both of those scores and put them into a concordance table. The main concordance table is approved by the College Board, which publishes the SAT, all the AP exams, and the PSAT. And it's also approved by the ACT. So both the organizations got together and they created this concordance table. So it's super easy for us to see, all right, you got this score on the SAT and this score on the ACT. Which test are you scoring better on? The reason this is helpful is that every school in America accepts both tests. They do not have a preference. It doesn't matter if you submit an SAT or an ACT. And you want to figure out what your strongest test is so that you prepare and just take that one test. You do not need to split your focus and put time and energy into preparing for both tests. That's not a thing anymore. Now kids will focus on one test and they'll sit a couple of times for that test, for the actual test, and that's what they will submit instead of splitting their focus. All right, so which test for each school? Honestly, as I mentioned, it doesn't matter. Every school accepts both the SAT and the ACT. So what we generally see is that when kids take a practice test, or if they sit for 2 real tests and we put them in a concordance table, about 1/3 of students there's a clear indication of which test they score better on. It's really easy to see, oh yeah, far and away, you're an ACT kid, you're an SAT kid. But for about 2/3 of students, it's kind of a toss-up. You know, they're scoring about the same. So we'll often go back to the kids and say, which test did you feel most comfortable with? And kids they pretty much always have a preference. And so that's the one that they should prepare for. What I will say is in the Mid-Atlantic, because this area of the country has been an SAT area for a long time, compared to say the Midwest, which primarily takes the ACT. Here, because so many kids are used to taking the PSAT, some take it in 9th grade, they almost always take it in 10th grade, and they definitely take it in 11th grade. They've had a few years of testing with the PSAT. So I found that in general, not most, but it's probably a little bit more than half of the kids just feel more comfortable with the College Board product. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the differences between both the SAT and ACT. Oh, and by the way, if you have a question that pops up into your mind, put it in the chat. I'm going to get to questions at the end. All right, so which test for which type of student? Let's start out with the SAT. What is it like? Well, the SAT is considered to be a power test, meaning that there aren't as many questions as on the ACT, but they are wordier, and it takes interpretation. It takes critical thinking and analysis. What are they asking me to do here? What do they mean by this? How should I solve this problem? There are a narrower scope of skills. The math is a little bit more difficult on the ACT. There are a few problems that are a little bit more challenging, but on the SAT, math is half the test, where on the ACT, it's only 1/4 of the test. So the difficulty in the SAT is in the interpretation and the analysis. Whereas with the ACT, it's very different. This is considered to be a speed test. You have to go at a really good clip in order to get done with every section, because there are more questions, but they're shorter in duration. And they are straightforward. So a lot of times kids will say, oh, I totally understood what they were asking me to do. This test made a lot more sense to me. There is a broader scope of skills, certainly, definitely in math and somewhat in grammar. But again, the difficulty in this test is in this pacing. It's in the speed at which you have to go. Now, the other thing I'll mention about the ACT is if your child has accommodations, meaning they have extra time, that's the most common accommodation. If you have a 504 or an IEP, usually it's time and a half. Generally, the ACT is the way to go because you're removing the hard part of the equation, which is the speed. And that test is a lot more student friendly without the speed issue. All right, so we've talked a little bit about the SAT, the ACT. let's boil it down a little bit more. Here are the 4 sections I mentioned on the ACT. You've got math, you've got reading, which is short and long passages. You have writing, which is grammar. It's not a free write anymore. The SAT and ACT do not have the essay section anymore. Those were taken off a couple of years ago. And there is a science section. And I cannot tell you how many kids we've worked with over the years that will say, oh, definitely not the ACT for me. I do not like science. I'm not taking that test. No way. And then I'll show them the science section. Actually, it's just a bunch of graphs and really it's kind of like solving word problems. It's more like reading comprehension. You have to extrapolate information from what's given to you. And they're like, oh, okay, I can do this. And what I found is that the science section is definitely the most coachable part of the ACT. So the ACT, the top score you can get is 36. So on each section, you can get a top score of 36, and then that's averaged together to give you your final score. And it's a long test, just like the SAT, a little bit shorter, but it comes in at 2 hours and 55 minutes. All right, so on the other hand, here's the SAT. Again, this one's published by the College Board. So if your child has taken the PSAT, it's similar, but it's harder and it's longer and it's scored differently. All right, so here's the SAT. There's a math section that kids are allowed to use the calculator. And then there's also a math section where they cannot use the calculator. And combined, both math sections are worth a total of 800 points. Then there's evidence-based reading and writing, also worth 800 points. And although it says reading and writing, it's reading short and long passages similar to the ACT, and it's grammar. And that's a total of 1,600 points, and it comes in at 3 hours. So what we recommend is when kids are ready to take the real test, and I'll talk a little bit about the timing in a second, we recommend that they pick 2 dates their junior year. So I haven't found success to kids just picking one date and not having a strategy behind it. So the way you want to do this is you prepare for the first date, you take the test on the date that you choose, then you get your score back in about 2 weeks, you prep some more, and then you take it again. And then you can decide once you get those scores back, do I want to take it a 3rd time? Typically, kids take the test about 2 or 3 times. So you want to pick 2 dates so that you have a strategy now. For example, on the ACT, this spring, a student could take, many of our kids will take the April and the June test. Or on the SAT, the really common dates to pair are the March and the May test. So again, they get their scores back, they prep only for the low areas. That's how you increase your score the most. You don't prep for everything, all the things you're already good at. No, the way you improve your score the most is by working on the areas of weakness. That's shown to boost scores more than anything else. Also keep in mind, although there has been this trend for kids to take tests earlier and earlier, and I started to see this probably about, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago. And then right before COVID, maybe like 4 years ago, it was just a big thing. COVID kind of put the kibosh on it. But I will say that there's been a trend for kids to take tests really early in their junior year. And the reason is kids just kind of want to be done with it. They want to have the rest of their junior year to focus on their grades, to maybe play a spring sport. But I will tell you, statistically speaking, although you can certainly take the test in the fall, you will likely get a better score the spring of your junior year. And this has been proven. The reason is actually 3 factors. You're older, you're more mature, and you have more curriculum under your belt. You've been in school more. And for kids that are preparing, that might also be more time for them to prepare. So again, plan to take it 2 or 3 times. And I would recommend getting help with the testing plan. I'm happy to help you, or one of our counselors is happy to help you and just talk you through it. I found that a lot of times kids pick the wrong dates, and they pick the dates just based on their personal schedule, but that's not always the best thing. There's also lots of other factors involved, like the math that they're taking. So I would recommend, getting help and making sure that you also have a date in the spring of your junior year. So I put together a handout for you, and you can get this by texting 55444 and the word testing. And this is just all the upcoming test dates and when your student might need to start preparing for each test. All right, so here's the next thing that I want you to know. The SAT, not the ACT, the SAT is going digital. And the College Board has announced that in the fall of 2023, the PSAT will be digital for students that are taking it. I'm going to talk more about that in a second. And in the spring of 2023, just prior to that, there's about 5 AP courses that will also be given digitally. But the big news is that in the spring of 2024, the SAT will be digital. So if you have a student who will be a junior, then that's when they're going to take a digital version of the SAT. So what is different and what is the same? What's staying the same for the SAT? It's still going to be a 1,600 point scale, 800 and 800. And it's still going to be proctored at school or a test site. When this first came out, we had a lot of parents say, wait, can my child take this at home? How do you know they're not cheating? But it's not like they're just going to sit at their desk or sit in their bed and take this test. They have to go to school and they take it at a proctored site, just like they do now. It's still the same accommodations for students that are eligible, and it is the same subject matter. So what's changing? Again, no pencils, no Scantron sheets, all digital. It's going to be shorter, 2 hours instead of 3 hours. And those long reading passages, which cause the reading section to be really long, they're going to be shortened. And kids are going to be able to use the calculator on the entire math section. It's also going to be more secure. So every student will get a unique digital test. So every student will have a different test. And the other thing that's also neat, I didn't put it here, but I wanted just to mention that it's going to be adaptive. And that means that if you're hitting a wall with a certain skill, the student won't continue to see questions about that skill. It will shift to something else. So not only will every student get a different test, but the tests are going to be smart. They're going to be adaptive so that it allows kids to test on what they know. That won't affect their score, though. They're still, going to get the same type of score that they got before. And the other thing is that it's offered more frequently, which I love. I think this is so helpful for kids to have many more options to take it. And they're going to get their scores in just a few days instead of a few weeks. Another benefit. So what should I do now? I would recommend that if you have a sophomore, think about in the spring, having them take a mock test or a practice test. If you have a junior and they haven't started with testing yet, this is a really great time. They can still take a mock test or they can take a real test. But I would not go into a test for any student without some preparation. We want to make sure that they put their best foot forward. And although you do own your data, it's always good to go in feeling confident, like you know what you're going to do. It's deflating to kids who haven't prepared at all. They show up at a test and they become really anxious. And then the score they get back is not indicative of how they can do because they felt so anxious. So even just having a sense of what's on the test, how it's paced, how it's scored is really helpful to kids. Use that concordance table. So again, if you have a younger student, have them take a mock SAT and an ACT. We'll put them in a concordance table and help you to determine the correct test for your child. And then you want to pick your test dates. Have in your mind, even if you don't register yet, have a plan. So we also are happy to help you with these things and also get you matched with a test prep coach who can help you throughout your journey with test preparation for either the SAT or the ACT. And we recommend that if you do work with someone, get help each week leading up to the test. Sometimes parents will say, let's just do all this in the summer and then they can take the test, like in January. But the brain doesn't work like that. That's, even though you may learn a lot in the summer, you're going to forget a lot of that over the fall. So we recommend that kids work weekly, leading right up until that test date, not taking a break beforehand. So if we can help you with that, again, feel free to reach out for a diagnostic test, an assessment, a customized program creation, and we can share with you about structured sessions and streamlined feedback. So a couple other things that I want to talk about in addition to testing. Again, testing is helpful. It can open doors to students, but what are the other ways that kids can stand out? Well, the two biggest factors now, I would say the number one factor, this trumps everything else. No matter what you've heard, this is true. Grades are the most important thing. And not just grades, not just, your marketing class or how you did in a regular class, but the rigor of your coursework. Which classes have you chosen? If your school offers advanced classes like AP, IB, and dual enrollment, have you picked those classes? If you want to be an engineering major in college, have you taken the most advanced math and science you can? That's important for a competitive school. So when it comes to grades, right off the bat, colleges are going to look at your rigor. Have you taken challenging classes, especially in the area you want to go into, and your grades? So far and away, these two components are the most important. But let's look at other things. There's something called the human component or your narrative. And this is what defines you as a person. What makes you stand out? What is special about you? And this can be demonstrated in a couple of areas. One is essays, extracurriculars, and also summer activities, and recommendations too. So when I think of narrative, I think, what is it that is going to have a reader think, wow, I want this student at my college. I'll give you an example of the student that we work with. He's in our college program. And when we first started working with him, he's a junior now, but he was a sophomore. And he came to us, and he said, I'm just an ordinary kid. There's nothing special about me. And we have this assessment that we give kids that teases out their unique abilities. It helps them understand what they're naturally good at and what they, majors or careers that might be a match for their natural strengths. So we're doing this with the student and get talking, and he's working with Lisa, one of our college counselors. Well, it turns out Lisa finds out that he's actually a really amazing fly fisherman, and he's won a number of tournaments, and he loves fishing. And he had created this little fly that he crafted himself, and he was selling them out of the back of his mom's minivan when he went to tournaments. And she said, I wonder, could you sell that online? And he ended up creating a site on Etsy and selling it through Etsy, and then also creating his own website. And so now this is what he decided, this is what I'm going to write my essays about, is how I took my passion and ran with it. So that will be his narrative. So he might write his essays about it. He's going to be doing these things over the summer, working on his website, participating in tournaments. So it doesn't have to all do with something that you're good at in school. I had the same experience with my youngest son. He was always good at creating videos for people. And a couple of local rappers had asked him to create videos for them that they could use to publicize their concerts, which he did. And again, he thought, like, what's unique about me? I'm kind of an average kid. And he decided in all of this that, in order to craft his narrative, that this could be his differentiator. And so he took something that he loved, and he went to Fairfax County and he got a business license. It's $25. And over the summer, he took a class in video production. And that's what he wrote his essays about. So your narrative is what's special about you. It may not be something that you did. I went to Boston College. I got my school magazine a couple of months ago, and there was an article in it from the director of admissions who said the best essay I ever wrote was about from a girl whose opening line was, "Everybody stared and laughed." And she wrote an essay about how in third grade she had to do a poster project, and everybody else had their parents basically work on the project with them. But her parents said, "You must do this by yourself." And all the people walking by seeing the perfect projects laughed at hers. And she said, "But that defined me because my whole life, my parents felt that I needed to be independent, and that's the type of person I am." And he said that essay always stuck with him. So what should 9th and 10th graders do right now? Well, they should focus on grades. They also should really think a lot about course selection. And I'm glad we're talking about this right now in December, because course selection is typically in February. And this is a time you really want to be strategic about the classes that you pick. This matters a lot, especially in math. Think about the extracurriculars over the summer. What is it that you want your child can do that they love doing already? Maybe they love soccer. They're really into soccer. Could they also do something? Maybe they start a shoe drive or cleats for kids that maybe don't have the proper equipment for soccer. What is it that they could do to work on their passion? As an example, that's a lot better than sitting around and playing Xbox. And then in the spring of 10th grade, think about those mock tests. All right, so 11th graders, again, focus on grades, have a solid testing plan. Make sure you have those 2 dates, continue with your theme, your narrative, plan ahead for your summer. And this is when you're really going to start to develop and refine your college list. So on your list, you want to have a really broad array of schools. What I've seen in the last 2 years, kids that come into our college program, sometimes they have no idea where they want to apply, but a lot of times they've already thought this out and they have some schools that they want to apply. And their list is super top heavy. They've got a lot of reach schools on their list, and they're pretty unrealistic. Not all of them, but a lot of them. So their lists are balanced and unbalanced in the wrong way, where it should be balanced. It should be, yeah, you've got those reach schools. You might even have a super reach school on there, but you got your reach schools, and then you have your framework or your target schools right here in the middle. And these are schools that it could go either way getting into. These are schools that it's going to be a real reach, tough to get into. And then you've got a few of your safety schools. And what I often see with safety is kids may not even have any to begin with. And when they do, they'll say things like, "I don't even want to go there." But we think it's really, really important that kids love every school that they're applying to, and they can see themselves at every school. And so seniors, right now, all of our seniors are pretty much done. Some are still doing applications for January deadlines. So again, finishing those applications, weaving themes into essays, and make sure that those applications for regular decision are out and on the 1st or the 15th, depending on when regular decision is, getting those done. So Erin, again, is our Director of College Counseling. She's happy to talk to you and discuss how we might be able to help. And then this is our next webinar that I think would be really great. This is Kristen Landis. She is our college counselor. And in fact, she used to work at UVA, but she's going to be doing a webinar for us on standing out to highly selective colleges. And that's on January 18th. You can go to our website to register if you'd like, ectutoring.com/webinar-series. So let's go to the chat, and I'd love to answer your questions. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. All right, so let's see. If kids get extra time on tests, can they still take a practice one? Yes, they can still take a practice one, and we'll help them dedicate additional time to finishing it. But the practice tests we give are under standard time. Will you share your deck? And yes, I believe this is being recorded. So I'll have to ask if a recording is going out. But if you would like the slide deck, I'm happy to send it to you. Just email me, Ann, A-N-N, at EC Tutoring, and I'm happy to send it out to you. Can you say again the text to get the test, the handout? And yes, it's 55444. Just type in that number, and then the word is testing, and it will come straight to your inbox. I didn't put this in the slide deck, but I think this is super helpful. It's not specific just to testing, but I created a checklist what each grade level needs to do. So starting with 9th grade, a checklist for all the items 9th graders have to do, 10th, 11th, and 12th. And you can get that by texting the same number, 55444, and then type in the word college, and that will come to your inbox. All right. What about students who play sports for their school, but no clubs? I think that's awesome. You know, you don't have to be a competitive athlete to stand out to schools. If you're following your passion, you know, most kids don't play at the super high level, but they do stick with it over time. And those are great things to put on your application. If your child has no interest or talent in a certain area, should they take AP or IB anyway for the rigor? One college counseled my STEM son, who is not good at English and hated to take AP English. He refused to change, and he was and did not change. He did not get into that school. So basically, I think, Marin, you're asking, what are your thoughts on taking a super competitive class if you don't love that subject? It really depends on the student. We've worked with students that, you know, they're math and science kids, as an example. They don't love English, but they've got their eye on a bigger prize. They want to apply to these super competitive schools. And so they'll force themselves, and they're good students. Like, they're willing to put in the time and the effort and do the homework to keep up. They know it's going to be hard for them, but they're really motivated. If you have a child who isn't going to be, if you're going to be, you know, on them all the time, telling them to do their work, asking them if they've made up tests, if you're going to have to be a taskmaster, I would not at all have them go in that direction. I'd have them stay with the classes that they love to take, because it's likely, even if you do take that challenging class and you don't like it, you may not get a grade that is helpful in the first place. Is there a change in the strategy to reading applications? Applying regular decision reduces your chances these days. Not necessarily. It depends on the school. So the question is, well, first, let me explain. There's three main ways kids can apply. There's early decision, early action, and regular decision. So early action and early decision are due generally November 1st or November 15th. Early decision is binding. So early decision is for schools that you absolutely want to go to, that if you got accepted to the school, you will attend. And it's binding, meaning if you do get accepted, you have to go to that school. UVA, as an example, has early decision, and you definitely have a better chance of getting into UVA early decision. More students get in that way than early action or regular decision. So if your child definitely knows, we always encourage early decision, especially if there's not that financial aid component. Now, if your child likes a bunch of schools, I wouldn't apply early decision. I would apply maybe early action. I personally like early action if the student can get a lot of work done over the summer with their applications, because it allows you to focus on your grades the rest of the senior year. If you get waitlisted, they're going to want to see your grades. And I have a lot of kids, like, you know, this happened to my niece, actually. She decided her senior year that she would take it easy. So she picked these super simple classes, and she just kind of slacked off, and she got waitlisted to a few schools. And it really hurt her, because not only did she take classes that weren't very challenging, but she didn't have great grades. And so you want to make sure that you're still in a good place your senior year. So for that reason, if you can get a lot of work done over the summer, it's really, really beneficial. So for that reason too, sometimes early action is helpful. Let's see, what are you hearing about whether schools will be staying or changing their stance on being test optional? When do you expect they'll announce the score? Well, first, I will say that every school says they're going to announce things in the spring. So I would wait to see if you have a younger student, like a freshman, for example, wait to see what schools are going to say in a few months. They'll give kids time. So they'd probably announce it the year before. Do you know how practice tests will be available before SAT moves to the digital format? And yes, the College Board is actually producing practice digital tests that students can take. Do you recommend that kids take the test, the SAT, in the fall of their senior year? And the answer is yes, if they're motivated over the summer to work on it. So what often doesn't fall in their favor is if they take it a couple times in the spring of their junior year, they don't quite get the test score they want. So they sign up for it again. Now there's actually tests in the late summer. They could take it up until October and still apply early action or early decision in November. But then they don't do anything over the summer. And sometimes they don't see those score increases. So we always recommend, if you want to take it in the fall, that you've got to have a plan over the summer. Some kids are invested in that and some kids aren't. Let's see. Do you recommend practicing for the PSATs? In general, no. The PSAT is not a test score anybody sees, and it's just for your information. The only exception is that if your child's in the running for a National Merit Scholarship, which is awarded based on junior PSAT scores, then you want to prep because you want to hope that they get a good score. That's super prestigious on your application. But in general, for kids that are, younger, sometimes freshmen will take it, sophomores, kids that are juniors that are not, naturally high scorers, my personal opinion is they really do not need to prep for the PSAT. Will there be an option for a paper SAT for students with dyslexia in a 504? Elizabeth, I am not sure. A lot of information has not yet come out from the College Board. They haven't released a ton of details. In one of my forums for test prep providers, we've been talking about these things. And right now, nobody really knows what that's going to look like. In discussing your executive function difficulties and how you overcame them, a good idea. Are colleges set up to help these students with an IEP succeed? And the answer is yes. If ADHD or executive functions issues have defined you and you found a way to cope with these obstacles and you're doing well, and that is who you are, I would absolutely talk about it. You don't want to talk about it if you can't have something good that's come from it, for sure. But if it's really made you who you are and you feel confident talking about it, many schools will see that as a plus, that you've overcome something. And they really do want kids that, that have wit about them, that have that resilience to bounce back. That's important to a school too. How many years has UVA been test optional? I don't know, Maya, but I would guess and say maybe 5 or so. I do know out of all the Virginia schools, the last school to become test optional was Virginia Tech. And partly because they like standardized test scores, it helps them. They get so many students for engineering. It helps them. It gives them another data point. But UVA was test optional before them. I'm not sure exactly what year it was, though. All right. So let's see. Any other questions that I can answer before we wrap up this evening? And thank you, Jimfrey. I appreciate that you found this to be helpful. All right, I don't see any other questions, so I will stop sharing my screen And again, happy to help you if you need anything. Maya, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to speak to you from the UVA Club this evening. I wish you all the best for a wonderful holiday season with your family and a great remainder of the school year. Take care and good night.